Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Social Hotelier podcast with me, Sam-Erik. Have you ever wondered how spaces we inhabit, whether it's a bustling hotel lobby, a serene cafe, or a thoughtfully designed office, shape not just our experiences, but our relationships, emotions, and even our sense of belonging? Today, we are diving into the art and science of creating environments that do more than look good. They make us feel good, connect us, and leaving a lasting impression. This conversation about hospitality, design, and human connection, where global experience must meet cutting edge research and personal insights. In today's episode, I'm very glad we have a great guest today, Ryan Anderson. He is the Vice President of Global Research and Planning at MillerKnoll. So, welcome, Ryan, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Sam-Erik. It's a joy to be here.
Well, I think this is an episode I've been really looking forward because it touches all the nerves. I feel it's so important about. We tend to talk one side of things about hospitality. Yes, we talk about design, but there's much more to that. So, but more importantly, to get started, so could you share a little bit about your professional experience and your activities and how you ended up doing what you do with MillerKnoll?
Sure. Well, I'd be happy to. So I've been in our industry, which is mostly focused on providing furniture and textiles and other furnishings for different sort of environments for 30 years. I find the relationship between the spaces we inhabit and how it affects our lives to be a fascinating one. I'm 30 years in and I'm still as interested in this topic as I've ever been. MillerKnoll is a collective of brands, so you might know companies like Hay, based in Denmark, or Herman Miller, based here in the States. And we serve a lot of different sort of environments. And so the way I tend to think about this is the concept of hospitality is something that transcends almost every space that we help to create. And hospitality, it's a place-based phenomena. Like you express hospitality in a physical environment. And so that allows us to begin thinking about how very specific types of spaces, or in this case, the hospitality industry, can go deeper in thinking about how the design of these environments create great experiences, both for the people who work there, maybe the staff, but also the people who are our customers, and ultimately improve the business.
Yeah, but your career has taken you across the globe and around the globe. And how have your diverse experiences in different cultures shaped your understanding of hospitality?
Yeah. Well, I know that you're saying that I'm a global citizen, but I know a little bit about your background. I'm not sure I can hold a candle to some of what you've done, but it's true. We have a team all over the world, and we spend a lot of time visiting different markets and seeing different sorts of environments. I come back to some of the ancient roots of hospitality about loving strangers, right? Philoxenia, the opposite of xenophobia. It's all about really having somebody else's well-being in mind. And that's expressed differently. It is culturally dependent, but it starts with a deep desire to make sure that we love somebody that maybe isn't somebody we already know or isn't somebody who's already in our life. That can happen in a wide variety of ways. It usually begins with making sure someone feels safe and secure and that they're in a protected environment. That changes based on if you're in somebody's home or if you're in a hospital or if you're in a hotel or restaurant. But it's all about taking care of people. And I think most of us have experienced these moments of hospitality that are really sincere, where you know that you're with someone who's really looking out for you, and others that feel a little manufactured, where it's like a business model, but it's not something that's really, driving those interactions between people. But great hospitality is something that can be experienced almost anywhere, as long as you've got someone who's in that hosting role that sincerely cares about taking care of someone else.
And that tends to be also almost one of the most difficult things to accomplish. I mean, brands and who creates lots of brand standards, they talk about the golden moment, the memorable experiences, and they talk about these things. And then we are hammering into the staff that, what's your job? Oh, I'm housekeeping. No, you're creating experiences. So they're getting that really almost like a brainwash. But then the poor housekeeping clerk try to figure out that what does it actually mean to creating experience for other people. And I think it can be very simple that you smile or look people in the eye and see that there's something they're missing in their room, that you actually make sure that it's going to be there. That's small things. And, that's how I lived through this journey of hospitality for quite a while. And it still fascinates me. I get really so tickled to death when I meet someone that shows sincerity, and they're even the simple thing, they make you feel comfortable. And I think more important that anyone who comes to their space feels safe, and that's wonderful. But you talked about place attachment as a fascinating concept. What do you think creates that strong emotional connection to a space, and how can business cultivate that?
This is one of my favorite topics. So, place attachment is a theory from the world of environmental psychology, and we've worked with Cornell University in New York over the years. And so, I don't know, it was a couple of years ago. I remember having a conversation with an intern that we had from Cornell about why people tend to sit at the same chair at their dining room table, each time, or why we might gravitate towards the same place. In fact, I was visiting Sydney in September, and the last time I was there was in maybe 2018 or 2019, and I went to this really specific cafe over on Manly Beach. And when I was just there in September, I found myself getting on a ferry, going over to the same beach, walking around, and finding myself at the same cafe. Like, I had the entire city at my disposal. Why did I go back to the same place? And the idea of place attachment is that we aren't just creatures of habit. We actually form relationship with places. And those relationships are based on our experiences there. They're often based on the experiences we've had with other people there, but they create a connection between us and the space. And you can see it when people start using possessive terms like my table or my restaurant or my favorite place at the bar. And the design of the environment is really important. But as you point out, you can't overly program great hospitality. It's almost always a really wonderful experience that you have either with somebody who's the host there or with members of your friend group or family within an environment. And in the same way that we can attach to an environment, we can also detach. So if we have that bad experience, it can put that relationship we have with a space at risk. I think we see this a lot right now with offices, with what's happened in the last 5 or 6 years. People maybe didn't love working in these really open offices, and when more remote work started, people detached. And you've got all these folks within the world of corporate real estate asking how, not just to get people to come back, but how to get people to reattach. But this is true of healthcare facilities. We see hospitals investing in these birthing centers so that if somebody goes and has a baby and has a wonderful experience, they're going to use that health system as opposed to the other one down the street for the next 30 years. And it's certainly true when we get into restaurants, hospitals, event venues. It's all about creating a great, sincere experience, just like what we talked about before.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my experience with going to dentists or going to hospital, you have that waiting room where you're waiting and you're looking at everybody's trying to just stare at the magazine or their iPhone, and I feel kind of a little bit insecure. But when it comes to that hospitality and when it comes to design, how have you gone about this to resolve the issue that people feel actually comfortable in a hospital waiting room? What has been sort of some techniques or thoughts that has gone through you in your mind?
Great question. It starts with addressing something that you just brought up, which is, do we know that there's common frustrations or just experiences that people really don't like that for some reason we all live with? Waiting rooms are a really good example. I'm going to circle back to that in just a second. But it's interesting that you mentioned healthcare environments because a couple of years ago, there was a general in the U.S. military who put out a request about creating better hospitality in the military hospitals because the enlisted soldiers now had more choice over where they could go. It used to be that they could only use these hospitals. And so our director of research, Dr. Michelle Osman, did a project, a study specifically on health environments, looking at what hospitality might mean. It came back to some of the principles we discussed. It was about protection and safety, particularly in that sort of environment. And when you're in a waiting room, sometimes you feel really exposed to other people. Sometimes it doesn't always feel safe. it's also about creating a degree of intellectual or relational welcome where people can talk about themselves and their lives and tell their stories. And you want that dynamic. And then it is that kind of shared table experience where we have key moments together. Um, I remember one very specific project because it wasn't very long ago. We were approached by a health system in the US called Jefferson Health to help create a better waiting room experience for their autism center. And if you're familiar with neurodivergence or autism, sensory inputs are extremely important. And so we co-designed a chair with patients who have autism that
Oh,
had kind of a textured armrest to give them a little something to kind of stimulate their sensory experience. But the chair had a kind of a screen around it, like a panel around it, some privacy, and there were some very specific facets that they wanted. As an example, pattern recognition is really important to those with autism, and so they really liked a herringbone type fabric. So we ended up custom creating this chair that provides a little bit more visual shelter, a little bit more protection in that environment. And as soon as we got done, a lot of people thought, I think I would prefer a little more privacy, a little more boundary in a healthcare waiting facility because it's awkward. You know, you're filling out some forms about your health, and you might be talking with your partner or your parent or your child about like sensitive matters. So we just have to keep coming back to those experiences that we know are not great, but that for some reason everybody just lives with, and begin to figure out how to make them better.
yeah, yeah. But can you also share some examples where design element has failed to make people feel that they belong? That could be very interesting because you mentioned now the success part of it in design.
Yeah, well, I think we need to be mindful that the physical design of an environment sends a message to people, and sometimes we'll use the term belonging cues, like what alerts you when you walk into an environment that this space is for you or not. So sometimes, in an effort to really create a premium aesthetic experience, we can cause some people to feel like maybe the space isn't for them, like it's too exclusive, or that it's too masculine, or that it's for older people or people of a certain ethnicity. We have to be kind of mindful of that. And I've seen it play out in lobbies as an example of different sorts of environments where you walk in and people appreciate a degree of refinement. And there might be some nice soothing music, or somebody's used a scent cannon to introduce a smell. But after you go to a certain point, it can begin to feel like, I'm not sure I belong here. Like, I'm
Mm.
not sure, like I can afford to stay at this hotel, or I came to this restaurant because it sounds like a place I would enjoy eating, or maybe it's an office, or maybe it's a school. But if it begins to feel like it was designed with somebody else's tastes, somebody else's lifestyle, somebody else's income in mind, it can become too exclusive,
Yeah,
basically, to the point where we've interrupted the process of hospitality. And we have to be really careful of that.
yeah,
We're seeing this interestingly in offices right now with private offices. Like, private offices are still part of the design of a lot of corporate work settings. And they used to be very masculine and all about expressing status and power. But as organizations say, actually, we'd like to see our people collaborating more, interacting more. We want the managers and the staff to get along better. Having a private office where somebody doesn't feel like they can even walk through the door safely is counterproductive. So we're seeing even the design of like a back of the house private office feel far more welcoming. Come in, have a seat, talk to me, that kind of thing.
yeah. It's very good. One of my favorite examples is I will always remember when I was 5 years old when I had to go to the dentist with my father. How what has been done with thinking about that the little child that's going maybe the scariest moment in their life where they end up going to see this uh, dentist is going to pull a tooth or something like that. Anything you have any thoughts you have about that making those kids feel comfortable?
Oh, yes. There's so many facets that can help a child or the parent feel more comfortable in a setting
Yeah,
like that. So, one is the use of color. Medical offices tend to look very institutional,
yeah,
and they have those kind of unusual smells because they're using disinfectants and cleaning. And so, having warmer colors, having a lot more and natural elements. There's a concept within the world of interior design called biophilic design. It actually extends beyond interior design, but it's basically like, how do you bring the outdoors in? So having more plants, having more natural light. You've probably seen aquariums in health facilities before. There's been some interesting research to indicate that looking at fish in an aquarium lowers heart rate. I actually, in my own home private office here, focus on not only plants, but I have an aquarium just beyond the view of my camera. So sometimes even here, when I take meetings throughout the day, my eyes might drift towards the fish, and it's a positive, relaxing experience.
Yeah.
I also think that having, books and other things are quite common, because it's a way of mentally allowing someone to take their focus off, I'm going to get a filling or a cleaning, and have a little fun reading a children's book. But there's also some other elements that people might not always think about, like what we talked about before. How do you allow a parent and a child to have a little bit of their own space and feel like they can converse freely without being overheard by, three other parents and their kids, or being too much in their space? And that allows just like a certain degree of conversation and reassurance that is sometimes awkward to have in environments that are a little more tightly planned. You don't really want people sitting on top of each other in any of those sort of spaces. So those are some of the things that come to mind.
That's great. So you talked about like sensory experiences, like how does the like a touch, sound, or even lighting impact how people perceive comfort and care in a space?
It's so important, and it's so poorly understood. I actually just was in a conversation with an environmental psychologist, Dr. Sally Augustine, about this yesterday, because the acoustics of a space, the lighting of a space, colors, etc., all actually affect not only how we feel, but how we interact and understand other people in that space. And so you have to just be really, I think, conscientious and considerate with some of these choices. As an example, music can be a wonderful addition to a lot of different spaces, including a waiting room at a dentist, as an example. But most of us have been in a space where the music is a little bit too prominent. I was at a restaurant with some family just last week, and I just kept thinking, it was my favorite restaurant, but they've turned up the music a little bit too loud. Now it's interfering with my ability to hear some of the others. And I was with a couple older relatives who I knew were really struggling. Like I could see those cues where they were leaning in to try to listen a little bit. Lighting is critically important. It affects our sense of whether or not the space is healthy, or whether or not it's a place that supports well-being. There's even been some interesting research showing that having just plants in a space can cause someone to perceive that space as far more healthier. It is, because those plants are eating up some of the carbon dioxide and providing us an oxygenated space. And if you see, a space that's really crowded and used too much over time, sometimes those air quality levels can get to the point where it almost causes you a little bit of a headache. So fresh air, lighting, plants, they all communicate to someone, this is a healthy place to be. Like whoever designed it, whoever manages it, cares about your well-being. And as long as we're considerate with those design choices, we can make sure that they don't interfere with the things that people are trying to do there.
Yeah. I think it's so important. For instance, that I paid a lot of attention to the background music, or the background, the soundscape, or whatever you like to call it. There were days, I have to tell you quickly, I love music. So I used to go to watch rock band, pop bands. And I thought it was the greatest idea when I was working in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And not far away, there was a concert event place. And we had one of the bands that I really admired. I had a chance to see the band, and what's called Fleetwood Mac. Now, Fleetwood Mac came for dinner, and they stayed at the hotel. So I thought I was doing them a favor, playing their album to the level of sound that I like to listen to. But they were very annoyed because they came for a quiet meal after the show or so on. And so it was sort of a kind of a fundamental mistake by me, because I thought I was doing them a favor, but I didn't understand the context, the concept of what does it actually mean to provide a very calming sound environment. So, if anyone thinks that they should put the the favorite band's music as a background music while they are serving the guests. I think that's not recommended.
Yeah, and I think there's a parallel there with all of these environments where there's televisions that are turned on.
Yeah,
If it's a sports bar and I get a chance to see all my favorite, football matches or hockey games or whatever, that's great. But if I'm going into an office building or a school or somewhere else, and someone's got a news program that's just showing one image after another of everything that's going wrong in the world, that's very challenging to our psychological, our cognitive health. And in general, we spend so much time on screens right now that we've seen an increase in this sense of loneliness, a decrease in the sense of belonging. All these interactions we have on screens don't necessarily lead to a deeper type of connection. And so we've seen this hunger for all of these spaces that are very quiet technologically. Even in offices, we're seeing more and more like large round tables, no screens in the place, just for people to go have a conversation. We see some similar dynamics, places where somebody might study in a place of higher education. It's really important to know when the technology is helping and when it's interfering with some experience people are seeking.
yeah. I mean, this is so important, and particularly when you have restaurants, they have to really think carefully that they provide that environment that actually people there don't necessarily come for watching the news. They want to have actually a quiet drink, or they want to have a quiet conversation, or they just want to uh, be in sort of almost in silence and enjoy something that they came for. So yeah, how
That's
important.
exactly right. Like at a hotel bar, as an example, having some TVs because there might be a big sporting match or something is really great. But throwing on anything related to the news causes people to feel that loss of safety within an environment. We talk a lot about the concept of psychological safety, which is more around like, do you feel comfortable being yourself and expressing yourself? But there's also this dimension that if there's things around you reminding you of a lack of safety in the world, it's just very disquieting. And so that can quickly become, turning a great experience into a lousy one.
Sure, sure. You mentioned about neuroaesthetics. I'm interested to how explores how aesthetics influence our emotions and decisions. How do you see this concept intersecting with hospitality design and creating memorable guest experiences?
Yeah, we're into a deep cut here because even within the world of architecture and interior design, neuroaesthetics is a very new and interesting, relatively new and very interesting concept. Basically, what we're talking about is the brain science of how the things around us make us feel, and how by impacting how we make us feel, how it changes our behaviors and decisions. And we have a company within the MillerKnoll collective called Muto, based in Copenhagen, who years ago, I think this was 2018 at Salone, big design event, partnered up with Johns Hopkins University here in the States and Google to try a really interesting neuroaesthetics experiment. They created these different spaces that had a very different feel, a very different vibe. And Google put these little wristbands on people, which measured some of their biometric feedback. And they didn't save the data because this was not a study and people weren't giving their data over, but they visualized it. And people could actually see how their bodies changed when they walked into different sorts of spaces. This, to me, represents a really interesting new frontier because if we can get a little bit better at understanding how the design of a space impacts feelings and our minds and our bodies in a measurable way, we can begin to promote even better design practices. So we've continued our work at MillerKnoll with what's called the International Arts and Minds Lab at Johns Hopkins University, as well as some leading design practitioners to continue to explore this. But I'll tell you, I think it's still pretty early. Like
Yeah.
as far as sciences go, we need a lot more data. We need a lot more experimentation. I think we know in some cases, like you could probably walk into some of the world's best hotels and suggest to me, this is the sort of ways that these spaces make people feel because you've been in the industry, you know it. Someone like me, I would only speculate. But the more that we can actually turn it from an art into a little bit more of a database practice, the more we can promote, really amazing experiences within all sorts of different environments using architecture, art, sensory inputs like you just described, that sort of thing.
Wow, that's actually fascinating. And as you say, it's actually very early on. When I visit new hotels that are being opened, I mean, they could really use some of that technology, and so we're not repeating the same situations. And because I'm quite sensitive to when I walk into a hotel. I mean, I got my antennas out, and I start to how does this feel? That's how I start my thinking, not looking at the people, but just how do I feel when I walk in? Does it feel welcoming? What is it? What's going on in my mind? And maybe I should start to write some mental notes every time I go into a new place, and maybe I use that as a small study one of these days.
I think that's a great idea. Actually, even just listing off adjectives of this, these are the adjectives that come to mind in this space. I think one of the challenges, and this relates to many of the things we've talked about around place attachment and belonging and neuroaesthetics, is that we need to design with, not just for the people we serve. So a more participative or a more inclusive design practice is really, really important. There's too many instances where whoever's funding the project or whoever's doing the design assumes that the way they're going to feel or the way they're going to experience a space is how others are going to experience the space. And so we like to try to think about a co-creative process where we can get people, just like we did with that waiting room with the autism center. We had the patients with autism involved in the design process. You can do that for hotels, restaurants, offices, schools. It's not a matter of asking people to make design choices because they're not designers. It's about trying to help understand how are they going to experience this, even showing them renderings or visuals or taking them to a few other places and saying, can you tell me how this space makes you feel? Every once in a while, we'll do a research project that includes what we call digital ethnography. But basically what it means is giving research participants the chance to go capture information digitally that we see. So we might say to someone, please go take 6 pictures of the places where you feel most comfortable or that most inspire you or that you feel most connected to the people you love. And what's amazing about that is when you get those pictures, you're seeing it directly through how they framed that image. You're not walking in, staring at them, seeing the space from another angle, and you begin to see elements in that design in a new way. And so if it were me going, like, let's just say I had the chance to go open a really nice hotel, I would want to know how other people experience the hotel when they step into that room or when they step into the bar or the lobby in a way that isn't biased by my own experiences or the way that I relate to other people or I see the world. And those kind of co-creative processes are very rare, unfortunately, but they yield very, very good results. We've
Yeah.
seen many instances where the design choices change and the customer experiences are, so much better simply because, it's a broader diversity of perspectives.
Exactly. Yeah. One of my favorite topics also that I want to touch on is sustainability and design. They often come together in modern hospitality, and particularly with the Studio Puisto architects that I work with, that is a very important aspect of creating the sort of sustainable human experiences, it's
Mm-hmm.
called, for lack of better words. But how can spaces balance ecological responsibility with the need for comfort and luxury, in your opinion?
Oh, that's a great question. And I know leading design practitioners are thinking about this a lot, as are we. Well, I think at the core it gets back to what we discussed earlier, which is this is about well-being in the broadest sense. What kind of choices are being made with the design that promotes a really great environment and a really great planet long term for the inhabitants of both? I think the challenge is that a lot of times really responsible design choices, like choosing products that have lower volatile organic compounds, basically making sure that the products aren't contributing to bad indoor air quality or that they're not cheap and disposable and are going to end up in a landfill. Those choices might be made, but the people who use the space might not actually know that. They might not actually see it. And so it requires a little bit of storytelling, in the same way that saying, we don't have to wash your towels every night. There's a more responsible option if this is what you'd prefer. Being able to say to someone, we've designed a space that has more natural light because we
Yeah.
think it's better for you. We chose products that have a high degree of recycled content because we believe that's a more responsible choice. In particular, I think indoor air quality, which is what I just mentioned, is one where people, even if they don't know it consciously, can begin to tell that the elements that were chosen for a space are healthier or not, because those that have more toxic compounds begin to release things into the air that humans over time do begin to recognize as being unhealthy or having kind of that weird smell. Sometimes when you're in a space that has brand new paint and carpeting, you're like, ooh, I recognize this smell, but I'm not really sure it's good for me. So I think it's a matter of looking at the design of the space, choosing the elements that go into it, and being as responsible as possible. We can help with that. And then telling the people you serve, this is what we've chosen to do. And it's for your well-being and ours.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about technology. And that really, hospitality and hotels has been very slow. They've been behind the curve for many years. But suddenly we got COVID. And then you started to see keyless check-ins to virtual concierge services, and it was a bot that actually came to have a discussion with you, and you don't really always know, is it a AI or is it a real person? So how do you think technology enhances or detracts from creating meaningful human connections in these spaces these days?
Yeah, well, for me, and I should tell you, I've probably spent almost half my career specifically focused on the intersection of technology and different sort of spaces. So I could go on about this one for a while, but technology, when it's leveraged well, can provide both better convenience and better experience for the person you're serving while saving time and money for your organization. I think keyless entry is a really good example where you still have an option to go get a physical key card. Maybe you want to talk to the person at the front desk and understand the pool hours and that sort of thing. Or there's other times where it's like, my plane landed at 11, I'm beat, I just need to go to the room. So providing choice is really excellent. But in particular, I think we need to be careful using any sort of technology that's more for efficiency than it is for experience. And we can sometimes justify technologies that save time and money with the belief that they're improving people's experiences. But it gets back to what we talked to before. In a world where we do so much through screens, sitting in front of someone and being able to have a little conversation is sometimes really meaningful. Travel in particular, it's a lonely experience. And so that person at the front desk, if they're empathetic and they take that extra couple of seconds to just ask about your day, there's a lot of value there. And we need to be careful to not, scrub that value out of the experience. So I just think it takes a higher degree of scrutiny. This is also another example where asking people, hey, if we tried this technology, is this improving your overall experience or not? I'll use one other example. QR codes saw a resurgence during COVID. It's like, if there was any winners in those crazy couple of years, it was QR codes. And sometimes QR codes can be great. I can point my phone at it, get immediately to a link, etc. But I think we've all had that experience where you go into a restaurant and you have questions about the menu and you're curious if something can be customized to not have that sauce included, and you're just desperate to talk with somebody who's not only knowledgeable about the menu but interested in your experience, and all you've got is this basically plastic covered QR code on a table. So there's an example where often it's outlived its usefulness and it's interfering with a truly hospitable experience. And we need to be careful to not allow that to happen in too many instances, or else we simply commoditize what we're doing. Even though the chef might be amazing and the food might be better, the overall experience still feels like something you'd have at an airport.
Sure. Besides the QR code, your career has also been involved advising on guest journey experiences. And what do you believe is the most overlooked aspects of creating a positive first impression for guests?
Well, it's probably inclusion. And what I mean by that is if I go back to that ancient root of hospitality as loving the stranger and how it's the opposite in terms of the original Greek of being xenophobic, there's just a need for people to prioritize welcoming others that are different than themselves. And so I think if you look back on the people that you truly think are most hospitable, that have had the biggest impact on customer experiences or employee experiences, they're usually people that really sincerely are interested in loving other people that are different than themselves. And so trying to foster a sense of belonging and trying to make sure that the brand strategy to the brand segmentation that says this is our target market doesn't go too far. We can have a target market or a target audience for a hospitality environment, but we also need to try to make sure that we're somehow not exclusionary. I'll give you an example back in the world of healthcare. If you look at patient rooms and just how challenging it is to design a great patient room, um, it's very good to think about the patient and their experience and what they need to do if they need help or if they're going to eat in the hospital bed. But they've got people with them a lot of the time. Like they've got a child who's coming for a procedure with them, or they've got an elderly parent or a spouse or whatever. And so, even asking the question, what's their experience like? And how can we make sure that if a 22-year-old child is bringing in a parent for some sort of procedure, that we're attending to that person's needs. So I just think there's a balance there. It's brand strategy and market segmentation and all of those tools we use to go create brands that live. They still need to somehow prioritize inclusion and allowing anyone to feel like this organization cares about me and what I do. And that's where those kind of participative design processes become so critical.
Yeah. I understand that you're also a podcaster. Am I right?
I am.
All
We
right.
have a podcast called About Place, which is just that. It's about the places we inhabit. We have focused a lot on different types of workplaces and employee experiences. And some of that I think would be very true for back of the house sort of environments and hotels, as an example. But we introduce a lot of broader concepts. So we
Yeah.
talk about neuroaesthetics, we talk about place attachment. We just had an episode where we unpacked the concept of psychological safety with really the world's expert on it, Amy Edmondson from Harvard, and just talked about how being in person together in different sorts of environments allow people to feel a greater sense of psychological safety, which allows them to take smarter risks. So tying those in-person experiences to innovative outcomes was, really interesting conversation. So yeah, that's the kind of things we dive into. And like you, I just love the experience of being a host because it gives us a chance to allow other people to share what they're thinking about, which benefits all of us.
Yeah, it's a great learning experience. Absolutely. Any surprising insights that you have learned about hospitality from someone outside the industry while you have interviewed them on your podcast?
Oh, on the podcast. Well, a few things come to mind. One is we actually dedicated an episode. I usually have guests from outside of our organization all over the world, but I had our head of research who's on our team, who I mentioned before, Dr. Michelle Osman, come and talk a little bit about that research around hospitality in healthcare environments. And I think about it a lot because Michelle, in doing that work, really took a pretty comprehensive and historical approach to understanding hospitality. And she made it pretty clear right off the bat, if we're thinking food, drink, accommodations, we should not start there. We need to think about the relationship between a host and a guest in the broadest sense of the word. Even somebody who's working in, like, let's just say, a university, if they're going to use a building in another part, becomes like a guest, and whoever is resident in that other facility becomes like a host. And so the more that Michelle unpacked that in that episode. I was already familiar with the research, but she had such depth of understanding that I kept having these moments where I was like, yes, that is definitely something broader. But the other person who comes to mind is that we have this wonderful relationship with a lot of different researchers and designers and thinkers. And one of them, her name is Debbie Lovett. She leads talent research and consulting for the consulting firm Boston Consulting Group. In fact, I'm going to be with her next week, working on a few things. One of the things that she and her team have been promoting is that we should look at employees in an organization as a type of customer. And we should take the same customer experience lens and begin to ask, what does this mean for our employees? And some of this is around retention and engagement and what is known as discretionary effort, like the degree to which somebody really invests in their role. But it reminded me a little bit of Danny Meyer's book, Setting the Table, and this idea of enlightened hospitality, where the better experiences you can create for employees, the better experiences they can create for others. And Debbie has gotten into this way beyond one type of space. I mean, she's looking into all sorts of different work environments and how treating employees as customers can actually yield better experiences for the people that we traditionally think of as customers.
Wonderful. Well, I think this should be a very good opportunity now for all the viewers and listeners to listen into your podcast. You have some terrific guests, and I'm certainly going to subscribe after this. So this is going to be great. But Ryan, I think really this has been a great discussion, and I think I could go on for another few hours because we could evolve in deeper and diving into several topics here. But I want to just say that I really appreciate that you had to take the time today. And if people want to reach out to you, how can they find you, and where should they go?
Sure. There's a few different ways. We publish a lot of our insights, including most of what we've talked about today, on MillerKnoll.com under the Insights tab. I'm very active on LinkedIn. So Ryan Anderson, MillerKnoll on LinkedIn. You'll see me sharing different insights pretty much daily. And then I also write a monthly column for Forbes online, which if you go and just Google Forbes Ryan Anderson, you can see some of what we're writing there. And in particular, those articles are meant to be easily shared with people who maybe don't think as much about the design of environments. A chief financial officer or a head of HR or whatever who might gain a greater appreciation for just how impactful these spaces can be when framed more in business language. So that's what I do there.
Very good. Well, Ryan, again, thank you so much. I appreciate that you joined today and today's episode, and thanks for all your fantastic insights.
It was a pleasure. I'm very grateful for you and the fact that you had me today. Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in to The Social Hotelier. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave us a review on Apple Podcast, which you can do with your mobile device. If you watch this episode on YouTube, well, I don't mind if you give it a thumbs up. And in fact, if you subscribe to it, because you can see that I have a lot of great guests here. So please subscribe so you can keep updated. So this will help me to get more guests for this show in the future. So we have an incredible lineup of guests coming your way. So stay tuned for more thought-provoking conversations like we had today. So until next time, take care and keep exploring.